Okay. Okay, here we are, kids. We're here with COFOH Live and Undead. I'm your host, Daniel Crosier, and that's our new intro from our sponsor, Summer Twins Talent or Summer Twins Productions. They make amazing horror movies and all kinds of crazy fun stuff. So we're playing around with a new format. We're now on StreamYard. We're streaming to you live, and I've got my guest Graeme Davis, but first, our actual COFOH Live and Undead new video intro. It's ridiculous. Something on my face. Oh my gosh, that was bizarre. What in the hell are we doing? I love it. And we're here with Graeme Davis, writer, editor, maker of board games, editor and collector of fantastic anthologies and books. Oh, man. How are you, Graeme?
I'm doing well, thanks. How are you?
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, this is pretty exciting. I think you and I met, what was it, a year and a half ago? I think you were just releasing your collection of More Deadlier Than the Mail. Is that correct?
More Deadly Than the Mail. Yes, that's right. You showed up at one of my signings.
Yeah, I think that was what was the bookstore? I think was it Luke Henderson?
Yeah, the bookies in Glendale.
Right. Yeah, I think he's a mutual friend. I met him years ago. I think during Mile High Horror Film Fest. He was
all right
curating a bunch of vendors, and I'm comic book artist in the horror genre, and so he's just like, hey, you're weird, why don't you come hang out?
Yeah, well, he's been very supportive of me and a lot of other local writers. I've done 2 or 3 events there, and he always makes it fun.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, Graeme, I'm so grateful to have you on the show finally, and be able to chat with you. For everybody watching out there, and remember, everybody, we're live, so feel free to comment and ask some questions of Graeme. We're gonna, he's gonna try and answer them, and I'm gonna try and relearn the English language. I think I'm already tripping over my own tongue. So, but Graeme, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where you came from. Kind of growing up, how you got into writing and doing and designing and doing board games and stuff.
Mm-hmm. Well, as you can probably tell by listening to me, I was born in England and spent the first half of my life there. Let me see. I think it all started with a Saturday morning rerun of Ray Harryhausen's Jason and the Argonauts when I was about 6 years old on my parents' old black and white TV. And those monsters just blew me away. And I remember that Christmas, I confused a department store Santa somewhat by asking for a book on Greek mythology. I ended up getting a model kit for a vintage car, but what can you do? So ever since then, I've been obsessed with mythology and folklore and monsters. And, as I got older, I moved on and discovered the old Hammer and Universal horrors. and started reading the stories behind them, and it just all snowballed from there.
Oh, that's fantastic. And how did you come about coming over to the U.S.?
Well, when I was in grad school, I met an American exchange student from whom it's not a perfect story because we're divorced now, but
that's all right.
But I've lived in the States, mostly in the Denver area, ever since 1990.
Oh, no kidding! Wow.
Yeah,
that's pretty cool. And then you still have a career in doing board games and designing video games and stuff like that. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, like a lot of people in the early 80s who were at college in the early 80s, I spent way too much time playing Dungeons and Dragons.
Awesome.
And again, you can kind of see the monster connection coming in there. Mm-hmm. And there was back in the day, there was a British magazine called White Dwarf, which was published by Games Workshop, who at that time, they're best known today for Warhammer and miniatures and stuff. But at that time, they had a much broader remit, and they actually printed Dungeons and Dragons and various other early tabletop role-playing games under license for the UK market.
Cool.
And so I started sending articles to White Dwarf magazine, and after a while, they broke down and published one. And better still, they sent me a check, which being a good undergraduate student, I converted into beer with all dispatch and then went back to write more. And after 2 or 3 years of this, Games Workshop was thinking of putting out their own game, a role-playing game based on their Warhammer miniatures game. And I was one of the people they hired to help make that happen because I proved to be a reliable and good quality freelancer.
Nice.
And so for the next, the second half of the 80s, more or less, I was working on that at Games Workshop. And then after I moved to the States in 1990, I turned freelance. I did a lot more tabletop stuff. Vampire the Masquerade, your listeners, viewers, whoever you are out there, what you call yourselves, you may know that. I worked on the first year's worth of releases for that, and then I transitioned into video games because the money's better, and I've just been jogging along ever since, as my father used to say, avoiding getting a proper job.
Why bother with that when you can make a living doing awesome stuff? So I didn't realize that you were doing Vampire the Masquerade and all that. That's fantastic.
Oh, excuse me.
Sorry.
Oh, the beauties of a live event. You can't edit that out.
I know. It's like nothing but hiccups.
That's right. So, when I was getting ready to leave Games Workshop and move to the States, I got put in touch with Mark Reinhagen, who was just starting White Wolf Publishing. And we had a few transatlantic, very expensive phone calls talking about vampires and movies and literature and whatever. And I ended up writing for White Wolf as a freelancer for about the first year or so.
Nice. Like, during those conversations, like what kind of influences did you guys draw upon?
Pretty broad range because, the approach that White Wolf's taken to vampires is to break them down into clans, and you can recognize, there's a Nosferatu clan, there's an 80s soap opera with shoulder pads and fangs clan, there's all kinds of others. So basically as many influences as you can bring in.
Yeah.
And then they went around the world, vampires from different cultures, Asia and elsewhere. So, it was a classic sort of geek off. You always know how it goes. When two geeks meet, you have this impromptu head-to-head trivia contest.
So
to assert, to see who's the dominant geek in the situation.
Nice.
And so we did a little bit of that, and then broadened out and focused into the areas that the initial products for the game were looking at.
Wow, that's so cool, man. And then what was the difference between like transitioning from like role playing games and the like to doing the same thing for a video game?
Actually, the way I did it back then, it wasn't too difficult because I'd done a certain amount of work with the old choose your own adventure style books, not that series, but the whole numbered paragraph, choose your own adventure kind of thing. And so I knew something about constructing interactive stories. And building the flow charts and everything else, and that came in handy constructing dialogue for some of the old adventure games of the time, the sort of Monkey Island style of game.
Oh yeah.
And so that's where I started, and the rest of it I kind of learned as I went. And then over about a decade or so, the games became more sophisticated, deeper, and the discipline of game design became a lot more specialized. So for about the last 10 years or so, I've specialized as a writer.
Okay.
And there are AI designers and technical designers and interface designers and all kinds of designers with all kinds of skills, none of which I possess.
Well, I would imagine you probably have the more fun because you can sit there and write the adventure. Then it's up to somebody else to do the engineering.
Yeah. If only that were true. I mean, to an extent it is, and that's what everybody everybody starts off thinking, oh yeah, but you kind of have to write into quite a tight space because you have to make sure you don't write anything that the game can't do.
Right.
And at the same time, you have to make it look as though that the game can do everything. So you have to hide those little walls that you bump up against.
Wow, that's interesting. I never would have thought, that you. So I take it you've ran into situations where you've written things that can't be produced.
Oh yeah. Wow. I've been told, yes, we can put this many characters in a scene to this standard of quality, but we would sell 2 copies, one to NASA and one to the CIA, because only a Cray supercomputer has the power to do that.
Oh wow. Okay. All right. Interesting. So it seems like too many characters or too many background characters. It's like, yeah, shut this down.
Well, back in the 90s, that was certainly the case. But you see games now where you can have thousands of animated characters on screen, and it's quite amazing.
Yeah. Wow, that's pretty cool. And then was it just a natural progression getting into writing stories and kind of editing and curating your own collection of books on
Yeah, it was kind of I'd kind of known that I wanted to work in writing and storytelling ever since I was probably about 6 or 7. I was making up stories. English was my best subject at school, especially composition, and so I always loved doing that. And in a way, when I got into games, they offered me a chance to explore my obsession with monsters and mythology and horror and that. But it was also a form of writing where I could get published, and it was a lot easier rather to break into than straight fiction.
Yeah.
And I always wanted to get back to more fiction and literature kind of approach. And I did. I've written a couple of game tie-in novels, and then I discovered the love of going back over, what was written decades and centuries ago, and rediscovering writers who you'd never suspect and stories that you never knew of.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what's behind a lot of my anthology work, is just keeping these writers and their stories alive.
That's absolutely wonderful. Oh, it looks like we've got a little comment. Daleen Murray says, "Love and respect, Mr. Davis." So you've got some admirers out there.
Oh, why, thank you very much.
um, so with with your collection of stories, you've got the two that I know of, colonial horrors. What made you decide to focus on that collection, and who's featured? What stories are featured in there?
Well, this goes back to a tabletop game I was working on, which is called Colonial Gothic. And it's basically the American Revolution plus the supernatural.
Oh, cool.
It's set in that sort of period. And one of the things I wanted to do with that game was to develop a fiction line. And to kick that off as a sort of proof of concept, I put together the book that became Colonial Horrors. Sadly, it became apparent that Colonial Gothic, it's a nice game. It's got a very small but very passionate following, but it never broke out the way that games sometimes don't. And so I took the idea to a publisher, and along the way, I discovered that really the colonial era is what American Gothic fiction is all about. It's the native soil. You see that sort of set of motifs, and you know that you're dealing with American Gothic horror. Wherever it appears, whether it's Nathaniel Hawthorne or it's movies like The Witch that came out a few years ago. If it's set in the colonial era, it's American horror, and you know what you're dealing with, which is nice because that's a sort of an interesting counterpart to European Gothic, which has all the crumbling castles and deserted monasteries and what have you.
Interesting.
So I sort of explored that idea a little bit in the introduction, and the publisher liked what I was doing. Plus, I found some kind of unexpected writers. Nathaniel Hawthorne, best known for The Scarlet Letter, and which has scarred many a young mind in high school, but it's not actually horror, just a horrific experience. But he wrote a lot of supernatural fiction. And Fenimore Cooper, Last of the Mohicans, he wrote a small amount of supernatural. And I discovered that genres were very fluid back then. People hadn't really gotten the idea that you wrote in a genre and that was your brand.
Right.
People wrote whatever they wanted to. When I was collecting More Deadly Than the Male, which focuses on female authors, I discovered stories by Edith Wharton and Louisa May Alcott and Harriet Beecher Stowe, people you'd never really think of as writing horror.
Right.
And it was a lot of fun just, saying to people, did you know that Louisa May Alcott wrote one of the first mummy stories? And people just look at you like you're crazy.
That's great. That's gonna be fun doing that research and be able to find all these hidden treasures. Stuff known and stuff that kind of needs to be rediscovered.
Yeah, and in a way, the More Deadly Than the Male grew seamlessly out of my research for colonial horrors, because it was when I was doing that research I discovered the Louisa May Alcott story.
Okay.
And then I thought, hang on, there's more here, but it doesn't fit in this book. So I put it aside and come back to it later. And honestly, the more you look, the more you find.
Yeah, most definitely. Now, you and I off camera, we were talking a little bit about, when you're putting together a collection, you come across, some of these, classic, stories. And from an editor's point of view, you're just like, oh my gosh, why did they have this line here? Why did they move this punctuation? This should be, do you find that in, to be pretty prevalent in a lot of the stories, or is it just some stuff? And then are you free to make those changes?
I prefer not to make those changes because I want to respect the original,
right?
Warts and all.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I'm sort of going a bit outside my lane, I feel.
Okay. You're just curating.
Just curating, exactly. And otherwise, there's sort of two sides to it. On the one hand, you've got your period language, which is part of the original. It's part of the charm of the original, and I'm curating. I'm not retelling.
Okay.
And the other is, as you say, sometimes you wish they were better writers, no matter how significant they were.
Right.
And my favorite example of this is Dr. Polidori, who wrote the seminal story, The Vampire.
Yeah.
And I've read a couple of retellings of it before I finally tracked down the original. And when I did track down the original, it was almost unreadable, not just because of the period language. I suspect it only got published because there was this rumor that it was actually written by Lord Byron, and Lord Byron was a rock star at the time.
Yeah.
Way before the Rolling Stones or anyone, or Axl Rose or anyone else you care to mention, was wrecking hotel rooms and frightening the fathers of teenage daughters. Lord Byron was doing it all across Europe, and so anything. Yeah, and anything with his name on was going to sell. So that was the rumor there. But I remember one very unkind reviewer from 20th Century Reviewer said that no one who has read The Vampire can doubt the wisdom of Polidori's suicide, which is pretty much the harshest review I've ever come across.
Wow. Yeah. Wow, that's intense. Oh, geez. The you and I were talking about the movie Gothic by Ken Russell.
That's right.
And I had recalled, and I think it was because of the film that Mary Shelley and Lord Byron and a couple other writers, had some type of competition to see who could write up a scary story.
Yeah,
where the germ of Frankenstein came out of.
That's right. Yeah. This was, I believe, it was 1818, something like that. And she wasn't Mary Shelley yet. She was Mary Godwin, because Shelley's first wife was still alive. But they were basically doing the wild child thing all across Europe, as they were wont to do. It was Byron with Polidori, who was his personal physician, and General Rhodey, I suspect, and Percy Shelley, Byron's friend, and Mary Godwin, who was his girlfriend at the time. And they fetched up in Switzerland, staying in an old chateau where bad weather kept them indoors for a while. And for the sake of something to do, they decided to have a contest for writing ghost stories. And Byron came up with nothing, and Shelley came up with next to nothing. Polidori came up with the germ of the vampire, and Mary Shelley, as everybody knows, created Frankenstein.
Nice.
So 2 out of 4 ain't bad.
No, it's still 50%.
Yeah, but in terms of kicking off classic horror genres,
right.
It's not bad at all. And Ken Russell's Gothic is his sort of rock and roll interpretation of the events of that night. Yeah,
if I remember right too, it wasn't. And again, my knowledge comes based off of the film.
Right.
You have. You've actually researched this stuff.
I've read a couple of books, yeah.
But I think you suggested it earlier that Byron got the credit for the vampire. story too.
Yeah, well, the lead character in the Vampire is called Lord Ruthven, and he is a thinly disguised homage to Byron by Polidori, who I think liked him a lot, and so everybody knew, well, this is Lord Byron, fast living rock star poet, disguised as a vampire. And it's the rumor kind of grew from there that Byron had actually written it, and it was in some way a manifesto. There's a section in which Ruthven expounds on what it is to be a vampire, and essentially why he likes hanging out in the bedchambers of attractive young women and biting them in the neck. And it's almost like a manifesto kind of thing, and people sort of conflated that and said, oh, well, obviously he's publishing it under a pseudonym. Polidori's fronting for him, but he actually wrote it. And on that basis, it sold like wildfire.
Wow. Nice. Researching a lot of these stories, do you find that the creation of the story is just as interesting as what's being written?
I do. And also the lives of the authors. This was particularly true when I was researching More Deadly Than the Male.
Yeah.
Because with a very, very few exceptions, these ladies aren't really known. Mary Shelley's very much the exception. And there are some unexpected, like I said, Edith Wharton and Louisa May Alcott and Harriet Beecher Stowe, writing outside their accustomed genre. But a lot of these ladies were, and here's something I discovered after the book had gone to print, otherwise I'd have put it in. But during that late 19th century golden age of short form horror fiction that was spurred by the expansion, the spread of magazines and newspapers all across the world, as much as I think it was 80% of horror stories were actually written by women.
Wow.
I know. That blew me away. And nobody knew that until it was some academic figured it out, as I say, in about 2018. And so there's all this stuff and all these women, and their stories are fascinating because there's very little that an educated woman was allowed to do in the 19th century.
Right.
And, if their husband abandoned them or died or was just a no good bum and they had to support the family, they couldn't go work in a shop or a factory or take a job. Someone of their class just wasn't allowed. But writing sort of got grandfathered in under sort of ladylike artistic pursuits, and so it was somewhat permissible. Now, some of them published under male pseudonyms, or gender neutral ones, like J.K. Rowling did. Some of them published as Mrs. plus their husband's name, and some of them actually published under their own names. But it didn't seem to matter. There was an insatiable demand for content with this new, periodical medium exploding, and they all, they all seem to manage to keep their families afloat, or express themselves, or do whatever else they set out to do by writing, and that's really great.
And I think again, this comes from the movie Gothic. Oh my gosh, I do not do any homework. This is pathetic. But it was suggested that Mary Shelley's husband, took a lot of the writing credit for a time, even with Frankenstein.
Yeah, and that's a story you see repeated over and over again. Sometime, well, I guess about a year ago, I was on a plane and I saw a movie about Colette, the French writer.
Right.
Very well known today, proto-feminist. And but for a period of years, her husband, who was a hack writer, published the stories under his own name and took all the credit until she finally decided she'd had enough.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I remember a feature film that Tim Burton did. It was like Big Eyes or Bright Eyes, about an artist, a female artist that was painting these really
yes, I remember that
of children with huge eyes, and the husband was taking all the credit, and it went on for decades.
Yeah,
understanding.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
Wow. What little men.
I know. how we have not all been murdered in our beds, I do not know.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad not all of us gone the way of the story of John Wayne and Lorena Bobbitt.
Quite.
Yeah. But man, it's pretty fascinating. Now, when you were researching, the stories that you wanted to collect for, More Deadly Than the Male, where did that idea come from? Was that a continuation with colonial horrors, or did it just kind of, sprout about some other place?
Well, it all started when I was researching colonial horrors, and I discovered this very early mummy tale written by Louisa May Alcott.
That's right. Okay.
And it was, I thought, well, that's interesting. And then in the anthologies I'd read down the years, I'd come across a couple of other female authors, but then I started to discover that there were hordes of them.
Yeah.
Most of them surprising or obscure. And in both cases, I thought they deserved credit for their work in the horror field. And before I knew it, I had enough for a book and some very interesting stories, not just the stories themselves, but the stories, as I said, of the ladies who wrote them. And, since the publisher had quite liked colonial horrors, they let me do this one as well.
Oh, cool. Are you currently working on another collection?
Yeah, I'm pitching a couple of different ideas. I don't want to tip my hand too much, but I recently stepped outside the horror genre and curated a collection of early detective stories.
Oh, cool.
Using the time-worn and seemingly inescapable title, The Rivals of Sherlock Holmes. There are probably 5 books with that title. Mine is the most recent. And showing, how the detective story genre got started, what the effect of Holmes was, how people tried to imitate him at first. And then when there was that hiatus after the Reichenbach Falls, where Conan Doyle killed Holmes off and stopped writing, various people stepped up and tried to be the new Holmes, and then he came back, and it's quite an interesting story, and you can kind of see the shadow of Holmes kind of falling over it all. Oh,
that's pretty cool. That's pretty intriguing. Do you find a lot of parallels between detective stories like that and horror genre?
Yeah, to an extent, yes, because they all kind of come from the same place. There was this period in the second half of the 19th century, as I've said, where I think it was probably advances in printing combined with people moving to the cities more. And there was just this explosion of newspapers and periodicals and short form fiction everywhere. Here's a fun fact. Did you know that the first issues of Cosmopolitan were actually published short stories?
Oh, no, I did not.
Including horror and detective fiction and all sorts. It wasn't, the whole 25 Ways to Get Him Hot and Bothered didn't start until they reinvented it sometime in the 70s.
So how long were they publishing stories?
At least up until the 20s or 30s. I didn't really didn't really check further than that. And that's another thing about doing this kind of project. You can find yourself getting sucked down so many side tracks and and eventually end up not finishing your project. So I have to kind of stick to the task at hand.
You got to put that rabbit hole right off to the side. I'll get back to you on Thursday.
Yeah, write it down and come back to it later when the project's finished.
Nice. Well, Darlene mentioned that's awesome. I'm not sure what she's referring to, but maybe the whole kit and caboodle.
I think it was when we were talking about the contributions of women to early horror and how long they've gone unrecognized.
Even better, yeah. That is pretty wonderful to discover. All that. With your career in games and video games, you're working on writing new projects, new role playing games, right? New video games. Can you talk about to any effect on what those projects are?
Yeah, sure. As I said earlier, when I was at college, I played far too much Dungeons and Dragons, and I eventually got hired by Games Workshop to write a role-playing game for them based on their Warhammer Dark Fantasy property. Mm-hmm. And that game, Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, just got released in a new 4th edition a couple of years ago. And I've been going back over a series of adventures for that game called The Enemy Within, which was very well received at the time in the late 80s. Actually got voted best role-playing campaign of all time.
Nice.
So I've been going back over this and doing what they're calling a director's cut, upgrading it to the new edition of the rules, putting in a lot of stuff that I couldn't put in back in the day for various reasons, changing a few things around, giving people options, because some people have played this campaign 4 or 5 times. So so I needed to put in a few tricks and twists so it'd be fresh this time around. Nice. And also, because it's that kind of game, to give the games master, the referee, ways to punish and humiliate players who think they know what's going on because they played it before.
Oh, that's so cool.
So that's a 10-book series. I'm currently in the middle of writing the 10th book, and the first 2 or 3 are out now. The publisher's name is Cubicle 7. They're based in Ireland, and the game is Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. So check that out if you're interested in dark fantasy, particularly dark fantasy with a twisted sense of humor. And I'm also working on a video game right now. I'm contracting with a studio in Paris called Tactical Adventures. And they're a bunch of old tabletop role players from way back, and they've all made livings in the video games industry. And they're doing a passion project right now, which is to bring Dungeons and Dragons style role-playing, tabletop role-playing to the computer in a way that's more satisfying than any previous attempts. And it's been tried for years and years and years, since the old D&D Gold Box games of the 80s. But the game is called Solasta, Crown of the Magister, and it's a classic high fantasy single-player 4-character party-based adventure game.
Oh, cool!
I've been working with a couple of their writers and their game design team to help create a unique fantasy world and the storyline for the adventure itself.
Nice, man. So no shortage of projects.
No, that's right.
You've got some great things coming out.
Gotta keep busy. Yeah.
And are you writing any original stories for yourself too, like to be published as a novel?
I've always got a bunch of ideas in the back of a drawer waiting for me to have time to get to them.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping, hopefully before the end of this year, to actually start something with Patreon and maybe do some writing through that.
Oh, cool.
I'm looking into that. And I've also got another tabletop role-playing project starting up, which is a collaborative with a bunch of people I've worked with down the years, and we've basically decided to get together and do the gaming equivalent of a super group, as some folks called it.
Wow.
And that's called the Rookery.
The Rookery, okay.
And which is, not just where a bunch of crows hang out, but it's also an old-fashioned term for a thief's kitchen.
Yeah,
London
nice.
slang. And so we're a parcel of rogues, and we're going to do this very cool role-playing project, which we haven't announced yet. But we've started to get set up on Facebook and Twitter, and hopefully there'll be some more announcements about that forthcoming within the next few months.
Yeah, keep us tuned in. Let us know how things developed. Yeah. I'm sure everybody that's watching this will be interested. As you were talking too, I was thinking, it's like, oh, wouldn't it be cool to have like an online video game, or a role-playing game where everybody can just pop in on social media and
a lot of people have been doing that.
Okay.
There's I think Roll20 is one of the major platforms, but there are a few of them out there, and I hear from a lot of people who are playing online now, and it's great because not only does it defeat the COVID,
Right.
enables us to play while social distancing,
Mm-hmm.
but also now that these platforms are mature and they're working better than they ever have, that dream of getting the old college group back together, reliving those memories, it's now within reach, even though everybody's scattered to the winds.
Right. Well, and there's no excuse now. All you got is time and Wi-Fi.
Right. Yep.
That's wonderful. Graeme, we talked a great deal about literature, and earlier when we were off camera, you were talking about coping with quarantine and everything.
Mm-hmm.
You and your wife are basically just at home writing, editing, and just you eat out less. So,
that's honestly, and I'm sorry this is going to make a lot of people sick, but that's been the only impact on our lives, really, has been no more lunches out.
Right.
So we're incredibly lucky because of the life we've chosen. And we're kind of homebodies by inclination anyway. So we're all doing fine.
That's great. I'm glad you guys are staying busy, staying healthy. Obviously, with Wi-Fi, you're able to connect with loved ones, across the pond.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know how anybody would have coped without the internet.
Right.
I don't know how they did it in 1918.
Right. Yeah, we were talking a little bit about the Spanish flu, and it's like, geez, let alone not getting in, a constant strand of information.
That's right.
Back then, and a copious more amount of people, dying and getting sick during that time around the world. But at the same time, I guess there's, with less information being transmitted, probably less misinformation also being transmitted.
Yes. Yeah. That's probably true.
Right. But at least, they, I guess, in hindsight, they were able to their entertainment was to pass the time was reading, a fantastic novel, or, You know,
I suspect a lot of them did.
yeah, and a lot of the the horror stories too that the short stories that you've come across and curated too, um, and correct me if I'm wrong. Um, the was it the late 19th century started getting like the penny dreadful.
That's right. The Penny Dreadfuls and the dime novels, and
Yeah,
at the same time, as I say, an explosion of magazines, periodicals, newspapers of all kinds. This whole new medium, just hungry for content. It's very similar to kind of how the online media were 10 or 15 years ago. Just that there was this beast that needed feeding.
Right, right. Yeah. Did have you ever well, I don't know what the difference would be between the penny dreadfuls, the quality of the penny dreadful stories and some of the short stories from writers like Mary Shelley would be. But have you ever thought about curating something specifically like that?
Yeah, that's certainly an idea.
Yeah.
It's all a question of finding the right angle.
Uh-huh.
I had ready-made themes with colonial horrors and More Deadly Than the Male,
Right.
and the thing is, there are plenty of people who are currently strip mining Project Gutenberg and just pumping out these undifferentiated collections. And I try to be a little more thoughtful than that. Try to not just present the stories, but make the stories tell a story, or at least support an idea or a thesis, like women were important in early horror, or at the colonial era is the native soil of American Gothic fiction, and to do more than just regurgitate stuff. So for that, it's really important to have an angle, an idea to base the collection around.
It sounds like it's curating in that way makes for really the potential for really good meaty conversation too.
Definitely.
Has the response just sparked a lot of conversation?
I've had a few comments and conversations online, and whenever I do signings, always have some interesting conversations there with people who show up because they're interested in a particular story or writer. I remember when I did the signing at the Bookies bookstore, which we talked about for colonial horrors. One of the stories in there was actually a novel excerpt from a writer called Charles Brockden Brown, who is almost unknown today, but he is credited as being the very first Gothic writer in American literature.
No kidding.
And somebody showed up at that signing who was a member of the Charles Brockden Brown Society and had studied his work passionately. And his first question was, do you have anything in your collection by Charles Brockden Brown? Because you really should, And I was able to say, oh, yes, I do. And we then embarked on this slightly one-sided conversation where I was trying to keep up with his depth of knowledge on this one writer. Ooh. And but it was a lot of fun. I learned quite a bit.
That's pretty cool. So researching a lot of the authors, do you ever come across something that's just absolutely shocking, or almost to the point of like it's almost be considered taboo with some of these writers?
Not really. And that may be because I haven't stuck my toe in the Penny Dreadfuls, which were definitely shock and sensation fiction. But no, so far what I've discovered is that horror was much more psychological. This is one of the themes of More Deadly Than the Male, but it applies across the board.
Yeah.
There was very little, if any, splatter or visceral horror.
Yeah.
A lot of it was psychological, and particularly, not exclusively, but particularly with the female authors. One example I like to quote is in More Deadly Than the Male, I've got a story called The Hidden Door by a writer called Vernon Lee, writing under a male pseudonym. Her real name was Violet Paget, and I could go on about her for hours. In fact, I may have to try and pitch a biography of her to somebody.
Oh, cool.
Fascinating character. But anyway, the story is basically about the psychological effects of guilt. So it's got a lot in common with Edgar Allan Poe's The Telltale Heart. But with all due deference to Poe and his many, many admirers, I think the Hidden Door is a superior story because Poe, and I'm going to make myself unpopular here, he did get a little overwrought at times.
Yeah.
And I could see, why in The Telltale Heart he chose to go that route, putting himself in the increasingly fevered mind of the protagonist, racked by guilt.
Yeah.
But it all came out, to my particular taste, as a little bit overcooked, whereas Lee, or Violet Paget in the Hidden Door, displays a much lighter, defter touch, which actually makes the psychological horror more vivid. Because it's not, there's no one slapping you in the face with a fish or whatever all the time.
Right. It's not so heavy-handed.
Yeah. It's like those ghost stories those movies where everything happens off screen, and they can be a lot more frightening than actually seeing a man in a rubber suit. Right.
Yeah. That's what makes, as far as films go, stuff like Alien, so effective, because you never really see the full creature.
That's right. Yeah, the glimpses.
Yeah. So when you have that abstraction, going on in a story, especially something in prose, as long as it's engaging, it just allows your imagination to run wild. But if everything's just kind of, here's column A, here's column B, it's like, oh, well, that's great. It's like, well, at least you can write well, I suppose.
That's right.
That's wonderful. The is there? Yeah, we're starting to run out of time, but is there like any topic that you down the road would just absolutely love to tackle?
Well, one of my big interests, as I say, going back to the monsters and my early D&D days, I ransacked the folklore section of my local library for new monsters that my players wouldn't have seen, so I could put something over on them. And that's developed into a love of folklore and folk horror. And I'm detecting a ripple in the zeitgeist right now, particularly in games, towards folk horror.
Okay.
And there's a couple of games that are on the brink of coming out. One is called Vaesen, Vaesen. Now, that word might be familiar to anybody who's seen the TV series Grimm, because that's what the folklore monsters were called there. This comes out of Sweden, where they've got a lot of really scary folklore monsters, and it's a tabletop role-playing game of investigation and confronting horror. Cool. But it doesn't have Cthulhu in it. It's completely folklore.
Yeah.
And then there's another game coming out in the States, which is called Solemn Veil. And that also looks interesting. And that takes as its inspiration the sort of folk horror of the British movies of the mid-70s, like The Wicker Man.
Nice. Okay.
And tries to create that kind of world and feel. So, yeah, I'm very interested to see how folk horror is going to develop in the future, in the immediate future. And that's something I may try and do something with if I can, as I say, figure out the right angle.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds absolutely fantastic. It looks like Daleen has been commenting. Yes, women writers.
That's right.
And there's always nature too.
Yep.
When dealing with the Spanish book, even now, go out and rummage around in nature versus just getting stuck inside all the time.
Yeah. Definitely. We're very fortunate. There's a trail sort of runs within about 100 yards of our house. So we just go out and walk along that a couple of times a week. And it makes a big difference. Get outside the four walls, stretch your eyes a bit.
Right. Yeah, you can get cooped up and go a little stir crazy.
That's right.
So for everybody out there that's watching, make sure you go and find Colonial Horrors, More Deadlier Than the Mail, on your e-retailer, or go to your local bookstore and have them order it.
Go to your bookstore, there's a new service I've just come across called, I think it's bookshop.org.
Oh, cool.
I need to check that. But it's sort of a collective effort run by bookstores for bookstores and supporting bookstores, and you order online and get books delivered just as if you were using the Big River. But the nice thing about it is that all their participating bookstores are members of a profit share scheme.
Oh, cool.
And so you can order online and still support your friendly local bookstore at the same time, which I think is a tremendous idea.
That is wonderful. And it's bookstore.org?
Bookshop.org, I think. Let me just do a quick Google here. Hang on.
Yeah. That sounds good.
Yes, bookshop.org.
Bookshop.org. Okay, sweet. So go to bookshop.org and support your local bookstore.
Absolutely.
and get Graeme Davis's collections. So remember, Colonial Horrors, Deadlier Than the Mail, and while you're at it, look up his video games and his role-playing games.
I thank you. Yeah.
What was it? What were those? Warhammer
Fantasy Roleplay. And Solasta Crown of the Magister is not released yet. Hopefully the end of this year. Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, the series The Enemy Within, is in the process of being released. And you can find me on Twitter at Graeme J. Davis. And I also got a Facebook author page where I post anything that's coming up. I shamelessly promote my work because need those royalties.
Yes, excellent. We want to keep seeing your great work coming out, and also keep you well and safe at home till this all passes over.
Yeah.
And hopefully
or this becomes the new normal.
Right. And things change for the better, maybe, I hope.
maybe if nothing else, people are embracing a lot of things like remote working and online socializing in a way that they haven't before. And I think society is going to be changed forever by this. Yeah,
most definitely. Great. Well, thanks so much, Graeme. We're gonna end the broadcast here in a second, and just to let everybody know out there, this is brought to you by Summer Twins Talent, Summer Twins Productions, COFOH, the Colorado Festival of Horror, in association with our good friends, another wonderful bookstore here in town, Mutiny Information Cafe. They are the most dangerous bookstore in the world. And they have coffee.
Excellent.
Graeme, thanks so much again. And
thank you for having me.
Yes, it's a great pleasure. Hopefully, we can chat with you again soon. And thanks to our commentator, Daleen, for chiming in.
Yeah, thanks, Daleen.
So greatly appreciate it. And with that, yeah, have a good night, everybody. Be kind to one another.
Yep, be kind, be safe, be sensible.